My adoptive parents threw me a massive 25th birthday party, completely blindsiding me by disowning me in front of 50 guests, only for me to look across the restaurant and realize my biological family was sitting 3 tables away, watching the entire execution of my life. I was standing there, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by coworkers, childhood friends, and extended family, when my father took the microphone and announced to the room that I was a parasite who would no longer carry the family name. The sheer humiliation was enough to stop my heart, but what happened next made the room spin so violently I thought I was losing my mind. As the whispers started and people began to turn away from me, I locked eyes with a woman sitting a few tables over who looked exactly like me, holding a folder containing the truth about why my adoptive parents had suddenly decided to destroy me. I need to know, would you have stayed to fight for your dignity, or would you have walked out right then and there? Tell me honestly if you think I was wrong for what I did to them after they threw me to the wolves. To understand how I ended up standing in the middle of a high-end Italian restaurant being publicly stripped of my family identity, you have to understand the dynamic of the house I grew up in. For 25 years, I believed I was the luckiest girl alive. Richard and Alina were wealthy, influential, and utterly obsessed with their public image. They adopted me when I was just a few months old, and throughout my childhood, they made sure I wanted for nothing. I went to the best private schools, had the best clothes, and traveled the world. But it didn't take me long to realize that their love was entirely conditional on my performance. I wasn't just their daughter, I was their accessory. Every straight A, every tennis trophy, every piano recital was a trophy for them to display to their country club friends. My mother, Alina, used to tell me that presentation was everything, and that a single stain on the family canvas would ruin the entire picture. My father, Richard, was a powerful corporate attorney who treated our household like a boardroom. Decisions were final, dissent was punished, and obedience was mandatory. I spent my entire life walking on eggshells, desperately trying to be the perfect, polished product they demanded, terrified that if I failed, the illusion of our perfect family would shatter. Things changed drastically when I graduated from college and started working at my father's firm as a junior consultant. That was when I began to see behind the curtain of their immaculate lives. I noticed financial discrepancies in the family trusts, and more importantly, I started asking questions about my adoption. Whenever I brought up my biological parents, Alina would become icy and distant, accusing me of being ungrateful for everything they had sacrificed to give me a life of luxury. Richard would simply shut down the conversation, telling me that my past didn't exist and that my life began the day they signed the adoption papers. But the curiosity never left me. A few months before my 25th birthday, I decided to do a private DNA test and submit it to a genealogy database. I didn't think anything of it. I just wanted to know my medical history and perhaps see where my features came from. I never expected that a simple saliva sample would trigger a chain reaction that would completely dismantle the life I had known. A few weeks after submitting the test, I received a match. It wasn't a distant cousin or a second uncle. It was a direct match for a biological sister named Clara, who was just 2 years older than me. Within 48 hours of reaching out, Clara and I were on the phone, and the story she told me turned my world upside down. I discovered that I hadn't been abandoned by a young, struggling mother as Richard and Alina had always claimed. My biological parents, Marcus and Sarah, had been a young, hardworking couple who were desperately trying to make ends meet when I was born. My biological father, Marcus, had been an employee at Richard's firm 25 years ago. When I was born with a rare, severe respiratory condition that required incredibly expensive medical treatment, Marcus went to Richard to beg for an advance on his salary or a loan from the firm's hardship fund. Richard, seeing an opportunity to solve his own problem, since he and Alina had been struggling with infertility for years, offered Marcus a twisted deal. Richard would pay for all of my medical treatments and ensure I lived, but only if Marcus and Sarah signed over their parental rights completely and legally agreed never to contact me again. Clara explained to me through tears that our parents felt they had no choice. It was either watch their newborn baby die in a hospital bed because they couldn't afford the treatment, or give her to a wealthy family who could save her life. They chose to save me, even if it meant losing me forever. Marcus and Sarah spent the next 2 decades living in quiet grief, keeping tabs on me from afar through newspaper clippings of my academic achievements and social media posts, never daring to breach the non-disclosure agreement Richard had forced them to sign under threat of financial ruin. When Clara told me this, I felt a sick, hollow feeling in my stomach. The people I called Mom and Dad weren't my saviors. They were predators who used their immense wealth to legally extort a desperate, grieving couple out of their child. I was furious, hurt, and profoundly confused. I agreed to meet Clara, Marcus, and Sarah in secret, and for the past 2 months, we had been quietly building a relationship behind Richard and Aline's backs. But Richard is a man who makes it his business to know everything. He had hired a private investigator to keep tabs on me the moment he noticed I was asking too many questions about my adoption files at the firm. He found out about my secret meetings with my birth family, and instead of confronting me like a normal parent, he decided to weaponize my 25th birthday party to inflict the maximum amount of psychological damage possible. He wanted to make an example out of me, to show me what happens when you betray the hand that feeds you. He let me plan the entire party, let me invite my closest friends and colleagues, and even suggested we hold it at the most expensive restaurant in the city. Little did I know, my biological family had also found out about the venue, and Clara had texted me earlier that day saying they were going to be at the same restaurant, sitting nearby just to watch me celebrate from afar, wanting to be close to me on my milestone birthday without causing a scene. So there I was, standing in the center of the private dining room, surrounded by 50 people who supposedly loved and respected me, completely unaware of the trap that had been set. My father stood up, tapped his glass with a spoon, and the room fell silent. He began his speech by talking about legacy, about how much pride he took in building his empire, and how he had hoped I would be the one to carry it forward. But then, his tone shifted from warm to razor-sharp ice. He looked directly at me and said, "Unfortunately, an empire cannot be inherited by someone who lacks loyalty." We took a child from the gutter, gave her our name, our wealth, and our unconditional love, only for her to secretly consort with the very trash we saved her from. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. My mother sat there, sipping her wine, a look of cold satisfaction on her face. Richard pulled out a legal document, held it up, and announced that as of that very moment I was terminated from the firm, removed from the family trust, and officially disowned. He told me I had 1 hour to vacate the guest house on their property, and that my last name was no longer valid in his household. So that is the exact situation I was in, standing under the bright lights of that restaurant, humiliated beyond belief, with my entire life shattered into pieces in a matter of seconds. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened next, and how the tables turned in a way my adoptive parents never could have anticipated, I want you to pause right now and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have broken down in tears and run out of the building, or would you have stood your ground? Let me know, because what I did next changed the course of all of our lives forever. The silence in the room was suffocating. My friends were staring at the floor, my coworkers were looking away in second-hand embarrassment, and Richard was standing there with a smug, victorious grin on his face, waiting for me to burst into tears and flee the room in disgrace. But as the initial shock washed over me, a wave of pure, unadulterated rage took its place. I realized I didn't want their money, I didn't want their prestige, and I certainly didn't want their toxic, conditional love anymore. I looked past my father's shoulder, out into the main dining area of the restaurant, and 3 tables away, I saw them. Marcus, Sarah, and Clara were standing up, their faces pale with shock and fury at what they had just witnessed through the glass partition. Marcus looked like he was about to charge into the room and tear Richard apart with his bare hands. Sarah was weeping, holding Clara's hand. I took a deep breath, looked Richard dead in the eye, and smiled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked right up to the microphone, took it out of his hand before he could stop me, and turned to face the crowd of 50 people. I told them that my father was absolutely right about one thing: loyalty is everything. But I told them that Richard had omitted the truth about how I came into his family. I announced to the entire room, including his primary business partners and the senior partners of the law firm, that 25 years ago, Richard had used his legal power and wealth to extort a young employee whose baby was dying, forcing them to sign away their child in exchange for life-saving medical care. I pointed directly through the glass partition at the table 3 tables away. I said, "My real family is sitting right there. The people who actually loved me enough to give me up so I could live. And the man standing next to me is a monster who buys children and calls it charity." The restaurant erupted into absolute chaos. The whispers turned into shocked gasps. Richard's face turned an aggressive shade of purple, and Alina dropped her wine glass, shattering it against the marble floor. I dropped the microphone, walked away from the podium, and marched straight out of the private dining room. I didn't look back at the people whispering. I didn't look at my adoptive parents who were scrambling to control the damage, and I didn't care about the belongings left in their guest house. I walked straight to table number 12, where Marcus, Sarah, and Clara were waiting for me. For the first time in 25 years, my biological mother pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace, sobbing into my shoulder, apologizing for everything that had happened. Marcus threw his arms around us both, and Clara joined in. We stood there in the middle of that crowded restaurant, a broken family finally putting the pieces back together, while my adoptive parents watched their meticulously crafted reputation burn to the ground just a few feet away. The aftermath of that night was swift and devastating for Richard and Alina. They had thought they were executing a flawless public execution of my character, but instead, they had exposed their own cruelty to the very people whose opinions they valued most. Within days, word of Richard's extortionate behavior 25 years ago spread through the legal community like wildfire. Several high-profile clients severed ties with his firm, stating they could not align themselves with someone who lacked basic human ethics. The senior partners at the firm pressured Richard into an early retirement to save the company's reputation. Alina was quietly ostracized from her country club circles and charitable boards. The wealthy elite may tolerate a lot of things, but public, scandalous cruelty to a child is a social death sentence. They tried to send me a legal notice demanding the return of the car they had bought me, but I had already left it parked in their driveway with the keys on the kitchen counter. I didn't want a single thing that had their filth attached to it. I moved into a small apartment with Clara's help, and within a few weeks, I landed a better consulting job at a rival firm that was more than happy to hire me based on my own merit and credentials, completely independent of Richard's influence. My relationship with Marcus, Sarah, and Clara has grown into something beautiful and real. We are taking things slow, learning about each other's lives, and healing from the decades of separation and pain. I celebrated my real 25th birthday a week later, sitting around a small kitchen table with a cheap supermarket cake, surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I am, not for what I could do for their social standing. Looking back, being disowned by Richard and Alina wasn't the tragedy they intended it to be. It was the ultimate liberation. They thought they were stripping me of my identity, but they actually just freed me to find out who I really was. That night taught me that family isn't defined by a legal document, a wealthy trust fund, or a shared last name. True family is found in the people who are willing to sacrifice everything for your survival, and those who stand by you when the rest of the world turns their backs. Richard and Alina spent 25 years trying to build a perfect empire on a foundation of lies and extortion, and in the end, it only took one evening for the truth to bring it all crashing down. If you think I handled the situation the right way and gave them exactly what they deserved, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more wild, dramatic, and real-life stories just like this one, and definitely share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.